Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Brandon Dawson with me. Brandon is the CEO of Cardone Ventures, and he has started many businesses, sold one of the businesses, and as he is living out his mission today, one of the things that I think you're going to take away from our story or from his story is when you focus on what others need and what others want, inevitably it'll help you accomplish your goals as well. So, Brandon, thanks so much for being on today.
Thanks for having me on your show.
You bet. So to start your story, from a very young age, you had a little bit of an entrepreneurial bug, and you were selling pumpkins on the side of a road. So talk a little bit about just that desire to have some business acumen and get started in earning money.
Yeah, I don't know if it was business acumen. I know that my parents told me we lived in Talbot, Jefferson, Talbot, Oregon. It's a little town, middle of nowhere. And it was a farming area, and so my parents, there was one little store where they had candy and stuff, and I was probably 5, 6, 7 years old. My brother and my parents told us, if you guys want to go down there and buy candy and do all that, you need to go sell. So we put a table out, and then we put pumpkins and corn that came out of the, it's kind of dumb when you think about it because we lived in a farming area. Everybody had their own. But, the thing about living in a farming area and your little kids is everyone loves each other and likes each other and takes care of each other. So we'd have farmers stop by and buy a pumpkin or two, and we'd make our change, and then we'd go up to the store and buy our candy. Now, when I got into high school, that served me well because my responsibility was pick walnuts and sell the walnuts for the family. And that was kind of my first entrepreneurial event when I got grounded, and I was like, man, I'm not going to be able to go see my girlfriend because I got to pick all these walnuts up when my family went out of town. And I invited all my friends and schoolmates over and paid them to pick them all up, and realized I didn't have to get my hands dirty. I didn't have to do anything. The more, it's like, oh my God, this is amazing. I could live my life this way. I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to do. Everybody was happy. And that was kind of my first foray into entrepreneurism.
Yes. Now you've talked about that in how that wasn't necessarily something that was taught to you. It was just something that you kind of recognized. Well, if I can convince others to come do this task, then I wouldn't necessarily have to do the task myself. And that might have been met with some opposition by your family. They didn't know how they felt about that. So talk a little bit about thinking differently in an environment when maybe that hadn't been taught to you, because I think sometimes as we're thinking differently, people around us, if they're not forward thinking or if they don't align with that same thought process, can, muddle those thoughts or, bring those thoughts down. And for you, it was a very empowering moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was out of necessity. So let's talk about how sometimes your entrepreneur genius eventually evolves. Yeah. Mine was out of necessity to get the walnuts picked so I could go see my girlfriend that I was grounded from seeing because I was coming home late every night. So it really wasn't to be an entrepreneur. It was a different agenda that, in reflection, and because I think the whole point in your podcast is looking backwards and saying, whoa, where did I actually figure that out at? Yeah. At the time, I did not realize any of the positive impacts of all the different things that I experienced over a compressed period of 3 days by having everybody show up and help me do this. It was only later, 5 years later, when all of a sudden I was getting promoted to positions where other people my age were coming in at entry level, and I was running sales teams of 25, 30, 40 people, and people would ask me, how did you get here so fast? It was only in reflection when I looked back and I was like, it was that moment when I realized, why would I ever do anything myself when I could do it with 30, 40, 50 people, do it faster, do it better, not do the things I don't want to do, and get a better result. And I learned it accidentally because of the intention of seeing the girlfriend, but it never left my thinking whenever I would go do something. I just didn't recognize that that's why I would think and do it that way.
I love it. I love that. So as you're growing up, you've said, hey, school wasn't necessarily my favorite thing. You tried the college route and then ended up deciding that wasn't for you. You moved to Georgia, and on the flight there, when you get picked up, it's time to go get some suits and then get booted out the door. So talk a little bit about, growing in the sales world. And I also want you to highlight, if you could, just getting it put in the fire. And sometimes people want to know all the answers before they get started. And sometimes you just got to go out and do it, and you'll learn as you go.
Well, I mean, most entrepreneurs are just out there doing it, learning as they go. I mean, it's a statistical fact that 97% of all businesses fail within 10 years if they're under 100 million. And that's because the entrepreneurs, the business owners are building their business through trial and error, and then they make fatal mistakes. And so for me, I was 19 and I landed in Atlanta, and my job was to be an inside sales rep to sell medical devices over the phone. I was doing that part-time in Portland, Oregon, and I was killing it versus the full-time people. So they offered me that Atlanta position. Yeah. And I landed, and my little boss, Gil Malone, 67 years old, little short guy, little Italian guy from Chicago. He's like, Brandon, we got to stop by this suit store. And I'm like, why? And he goes, I got to get you 2 suits. I go, why? And he goes, well, the outside sales rep got sick and you have to drive to Birmingham, Alabama Monday and do an open house. And I'm like, what's an open house? Like, I didn't know anything about anything, but I went there and I was so scared. First, I hate to admit this, but I was a 2.4 GPA from a little town in Corvallis, Oregon. And I really didn't even know how to like use atlases and read maps. I wasn't a good student. I had to figure out how to get from Atlanta, Georgia to Birmingham, Alabama with a great big atlas road map, right? The old fashioned way, because there's no GPS. You can put it in a phone. They didn't even have the thing you could print, the map quest yet.
Oh, map quest, yeah.
So I go there, and I got my little Italian boss bought me a 3-piece black and a 3-piece blue polyester suits with pink shirts and bright pink ties, because the little Italian guy from Chicago. And see, I was a chubby kid from Portland, Oregon. I had no idea what humidity was. I parked my car 3 blocks from where I had to do the open house. By the time I got to the open house, I looked like a wet noodle. So they sent me back home, and I realized polyester, July, humidity, South is probably not a good mix. So, but I did that open house, and because I didn't actually know anything. Yeah. I didn't do what the other sales reps did. I didn't sit and try to sell and convince, because I actually didn't. So the deal was they'd bring in the patient to me and say, make a recommendation for your product. Well, I didn't know how to do that. So what I did is I asked the patients, like, of these products, which ones do you think would best fit your lifestyle based on what they do? And the patient would pick. Yeah. And instead of the sales cycle being 45 minutes to an hour, it was in 10 minutes. And my close rate was 4 or 5 times what the other salespeople, because I wasn't sitting there trying to convince anybody, and I was able to see more people. So my overall volume was one of the best records for an open house. So I got a reputation very quickly as being the best. Yeah. And the truth is only because I didn't have a clue what I was doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes less information is better.
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple of things I want to break down from that. One is, sometimes in any type of a sales role, like, a confused mind says no, right? So sometimes it's keeping it simple. And if they have specific questions, let them dive into it, but you don't need to, murky the water beforehand. But then I think the second part is, you focused on what the person needed, not the product you were selling. Right.
Exactly.
And you focused on what they needed. So, someone out here is listening and they're in a sales career, they're getting started in a sales career, and they're so concerned about getting started because they don't know enough yet. But really what they need to focus on is the person they're sitting across from. So talk a little bit about, word of encouragement for someone that's, getting started or is, beginning that type of a role, and how they should focus on others first.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, the one natural thing I had going for me that was unintentionally developed, I don't know how I got it, right, was my ability to communicate and relate to people and just be a good person, and and the common sense to let them tell me what they wanted and say, hey, I can help you. Yeah. I wasn't really per se, I never considered myself a sales person, although I ended up in my early career running massive sales teams and sales efforts because I was good at getting people to say yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what I realize is if it's logical and if it makes sense for them and it's their idea, they're going to go along with it. If it's my idea and it's good for me, they're going to resist it. So learning how to communicate and properly, I use the word sell because I think one of the things at 55 years old, who's built, a multi-$100 million net worth, is I recognize every single conversation I have is selling or being sold, which is why Grant
Yes.
wrote Sell or Be Sold.
Yeah.
And so I'm either being convinced or I'm convincing.
Yeah.
And so that's true for every conversation. Think about the conversations you have with your parents where they're telling you what you should do and how you should do it. Think about the school telling you how you should learn and what you should learn, and then what you should do after you're done learning. Go to college and get a good career. Everyone's being told what to do. Somebody is selling everyone all the time, or you're convinced what you're going to do and you've sold yourself, and now you're going to go convince others. And you get the results, which is what actually convinces them, not you talking about it. So the first thing, if that's the algorithm to success, learning how to properly communicate and articulate with persuasion, whatever your mission, your vision, your values, your purpose, your intention is. That if you can't learn to do that, you're always going to be sold by somebody else. And then secondly, having the courage just to take action and failing forward until you figure it out, because most people want it to be perfect before they take any action, and therefore they never actually, to your point, learn how to do it. So they're always conceiving it, never actually realizing it. And it's in the realization that you modify things in order to become better at whatever you're doing. It's not in the thinking about it. And then thirdly, setting targets and hitting targets and winning. And then fourthly, teaching other people how to do the same thing. And once you've mastered those elements, there really isn't any rules. You just have to be smart enough about what you go do and make sure the thing you do actually has already proven to work. And then you're going to be unbelievably successful.
I love that. Now, as somebody is interacting with others, inevitably in the world of sales, head trash is just a piece of the pie, right? It could be head trash on, getting in front of people. It could be, am I good enough, right? Imposter syndrome of, am I good enough to do this well at a high level? But what's your encouragement to people if they're interacting head trash, or if they're, not as confident as they need to be to go out and have success and be able to influence others?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's amazing how many times I've been asked that question over the last 35 years. I go back to the 7th grade, and so just bear with me a second. I played 5th grade, 6th grade, and then 7th grade football. And I wasn't a very good football player. I was afraid of getting hit and getting hurt. I remember my dad telling me, son, you're either going to be the one hitting or you're going to be the one getting hit.
Right.
And I will never forget when I made a commitment on a kickoff return to hit the crap out of the guy running the ball back instead of kind of flinching. Yeah. I hit him so hard that both of us were like two trains coming to a train wreck.
Yeah.
And I bounced up from that hit. He bounced up from the hit. We both looked at each other in amazement that we both bounced up. We both high-fived each other, even though we're on different teams. And after that, I looked to hit that hard every single time. And even though I played, I played very small school ball, but I was all state and played both ways because I could hit hard. And the thing is, I think that's the analogy I like to use, because until you know, you're going to be afraid. Yep. But once you experience it and you're like, that didn't hurt. Yeah. Being told no didn't actually kill me. So I'm going to keep going until somebody says yes. And I'm going to get better at communicating the value proposition, so it's easier for somebody to say yes. And see, the other thing is your psyche. For me, I learned most people, when they hear no, so it's how you frame it in your mind. So I learned very, very early, like 20 years old, when people said no, some people think they mean N-O.
Yep.
For me, it was K-N-O-W. I don't know why I should say yes.
Yeah.
And I just owned that it was my responsibility. Now, first, I'll admit, again, sometimes these things come out of necessity. That started with the girl that worked at the 7-Eleven that was on the cover of Playboy for Oregon State University, always telling me no. Until she said yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes you learn these things out of desperation, but you can apply them to all aspects of your life.
Yes. I love that. And, one thing that I share in similar to you. So I started my financial planning practice when I was 19. And I oftentimes say I didn't have as many nerves because I was probably just too young and dumb or foolish to be concerned. Right. I remember, calling the president of a bank. And I was like, well, why wouldn't I call this guy to set up a meeting, you know? And I didn't think twice because I probably didn't know any better, but I think sometimes we overthink the problem, right? I mean, hey, in 30 seconds, the interaction is probably going to be over anyway, and you're going to get one of two answers, and we can move on from that.
Yeah, and if you learn, like we teach, you know, Grant Cardone is the #1 sales trainer in the globe, and the things he's been able to do and the hundreds of thousands of people he's taught to be successful. And that's why he and I partnered, because I bring all the business structural elements in, and he brings in the sales and marketing side of it. And obviously he's put that to work, raising only human on the planet to raise 1.3 billion in crowdfunding. And so he's an expert at communication to people and getting it easy for them to say yes. And I think when people run into resistance in their life, it's because they have not crafted the communication ability, or they're not operating legal, moral, ethically, or compliantly. So they have resistance, which is that thing you talked about earlier, the what do you call it? Where you're uncertain of yourself. So it's hard for you to present yourself properly because you don't feel good about what you're doing. And I think if you're selling things or trying to convince people to do things that you don't feel good about, that's a lead indicator that you need to move to something you feel passionate about, you trust, and you believe in, and then you'll be much better at what you do. You get rid of that resistance.
That's great. I love that advice. So as you're having success in sales company, unfortunately, inside the family dynamic, if I understand correctly, your mom and your stepdad who own the company end up getting divorced, and you decide, you know, it might be time for me to pivot and do something else just to, you know, not create any drama. So talk a little bit about having success and then pivoting into a new world or a new field.
Well, the best thing that happened to me, it's that moment, that aha moment where you reflect back again. So I had moved to Atlanta. I became the outside sales rep. I was #1. The problem was my little boss, Gil Malone, was bringing over girls from the office and sleeping with them. And so I found that out. And because it was a family business, he was afraid I was going to tell my family. So he came up with this excuse to fire me, and he did. And he took my keys, and he took, like, literally brought me in the office in Atlanta. I'd been there for about 9-10 months. Fired me because he was afraid of what I would say to my family. And I'm like, sure, dude, here's my keys. It's going to be all of about, you know, an hour for me to get home before somebody's calling me, my mom or my stepdad or brother or something. Yeah. And so I was like, all right, if that's what you want to do. So I walked out of there, and I was walking home, and I had a company credit card that I owed $2,500 on. And he said he was holding all my checks. So I went into the bank, and I finagled the bank to give me a 12-month loan to pay off my credit card. And I walked to my apartment, and I waited for like 3 days, and no phone call rang. And so I got determined. I was like, I'm not calling my family if they're not calling me. Like, they have to know about this. I just assumed they knew about it. Well, a week went by, and so I'd go down in the evenings with this guy that I used to hang out with, who is an undercover cop, and we hustled pool. So that's just for fun, you know, $5 games, 6-ball, 9-ball, or 8-ball runs, stuff like that. Yeah. But we started playing for more because I needed money. So we started playing $20 rack games, and we were winning a lot. And so all of a sudden, I didn't want the phone call anymore. Because one of my other buddies had me selling ad space, going up and down the street selling ad space for companies to promote their business on the back of their cards for the universities and the multifamilies. And we'd go drop these plastic cards off, and we'd keep the cash. I all of a sudden was on my own. I didn't have to answer to anybody, and I was making more money than when I was actually working for the company. Yeah. And I could play pool. I could screw around. I could choose when I wanted to get up. I could choose what I wanted to do. And that went on literally for 9 months, because I finally got a phone call about a month into it, and I explained what happened. Wow. That launched an investigation. They ended up firing my old boss and getting rid of him. But that process took about 6 months. And during that 6 months, I refused to go back to work. I just loved it. Now, the reason that was a really good experience for me is because fast forward, that was 1988. Fast forward to 1995, I was running North American sales. Both of my older brothers worked for me. I had created a program that year in 95 did $28 million in revenue. My parents were going through a divorce that started in 92, although I was very close to my stepdad. And so I stayed running the company, assuming it was all going to sort itself out, because when they got married, the company was a startup. And when they got divorced, it was doing 350 million in revenue. So I assumed that, like, I don't even need to get in the middle one way or another. It's going to play out. Well, unfortunately, my stepdad did some things, and it was a very sad situation. And my mother did some things to make it difficult for her. So it prolonged. And it prolonged until the new girlfriend and her kids were coming in. And I could see the writing on the wall. So I had a brand new newborn. I had a 2-year-old. I had built a $500,000 home. I was making $175,000, a $35,000 base, and the rest was commission. And I'd been doing that for 3 or 4 years. So I was very successful. I walked in December 15th, 1995, and I told my stepdad, I don't want to get stuck between you and mom. I don't want to get stuck between you and your new lady. I'm packing everything up. I'm selling everything. I'm moving to Oregon with my brand new newborn, my kids, and I'm going to start a business. And he tried to convince me to stay, but I left. I quit that night. I had watched other people say they're going to quit, and then him talking back, and then they act, and then he treated them like shit, and they acted like little bitches because they lost all their confidence. I made a commitment. If I ever quit, I was done.
Yeah.
If I hadn't had that success back in Atlanta, I don't think I would have had the courage to walk away from making 175,000 with a brand new baby. So it's that thing where you look back and you're like, that's why I had the courage.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so I want to highlight that in your story, because for a lot of people, and you see this all the time, right? Man, 175 is good enough. Like, I can handle this. I can do this for, longer. I'll just be okay with it. You made a very difficult choice in regards to, you had a good life. You had a good income stream, right? There was a lot there, but you were willing to bet on yourself. You were willing to bet on the fact that Brandon has the skills and the confidence that, I don't know what the next path is yet, but like, whatever it is, I will land on my feet and it'll be successful. So talk a little bit about just being willing to bet on yourself, even in times of uncertainty.
Well, and I think that's the best time to bet on yourself.
Yeah.
If you can't be certain, at least about yourself, you're not ever going to be certain about anything. So to me, is like, this is my opportunity to prove I'm going to be able to do it, because I only have to bet on myself. I don't have to bet on any decision anybody else makes.
Yeah.
And I'd also paid attention in the industry, being in charge of North American sales. I had a lot of my customers that were coming up saying, hey, it's been great working with you guys. I'm retiring. I shut my business down. There was nobody buying those businesses. So my strategy was, I'd leave the manufacturing side and I'd become the first one to buy the businesses. And since they weren't really selling them and there was no value, they'll just give them to me. And that was my thought.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I have saved, after I sold my house and moved in a little teeny tiny home in Oregon, I had saved enough cash that I could live like 10 months. So I was like, this is no problem. I'm going to get 1 or 2 or 3 businesses. and then I'll start making money. Well, I was 7 or 8 months into trying to convince the first person to sell me, and I was running out of money. And that's where you really question yourself. And I'll never forget, because I was driving up to Vancouver, BC to meet the first business owner that said, yes, I will sell you my business. And I was driving up there, and I had to convince him to sell me half his business for a note, because I didn't have any money. And everyone else had said no. And so I was driving up there. It was foggy. I pulled over just outside of Seattle on the way from Portland to Vancouver, BC. And it just overwhelmed me that I might actually have tactfully or technically made a mistake believing I could do this. And I pulled over on the side of the car. It was foggy out. I couldn't hardly see it. And I sobbed like a little baby, like when my parents first got divorced when I was 8. Yeah. I remember feeling that same way, like, it's helpless. I'm screwed. What did I do? I threw my whole life away. And I did that for about 15, 20 minutes. And then all of a sudden, a little voice inside my head said, you just need to get your first hit. You just need to hit so hard. And I got my shit together, and I drove up to Vancouver, BC, and I got that person to tell me yes. And then I also raised my first $1 million. And it all happened quickly once I decided there was no other alternative. I just forced myself to make it happen. And that's a difficult thing to explain to people, but sometimes your best things happen when you believe you're so against the wall, you don't have a choice, but you take action, because you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And once you do that once, you have the belief you can do it forever.
I love it. Now, with that, I mean, as you're talking about it, I think something that we fall victim to is we feel like we just respond to the emotions that happen. But the reality is you picked to listen to the one, maybe it was the only positive thought you had in your head that day, right? That might have been the only darn one. And there was 20,000 negative thoughts, but you decided to pick to listen to the positive one and act based on the positive one. And I think so frequently people will say, well, I just had these negative thoughts. I had these negative emotions, but you decided to follow that path opposed to you, Brandon, decided to follow the positive thought and see where that could lead you.
I think this is where resilience comes in, but also I would just make this challenge. Whatever you think about, you create more of.
Yeah.
So I didn't know this then, but I know it now. Okay. So this is for people that are like, oh, if you knew one thing, what would it be? Well, this is the thing. Whatever you're thinking about, you're going to create more of. It's law of, that's how law of attraction, law of intention, law of action, law of attraction. So you're sitting focused on something long enough, you will manifest it. So when you're thinking about all the things that could go wrong, you're going to create the conditions for things to go wrong because you're not actually looking for the things that are right and taking action towards what's right and then modifying your engagement so you can find the success. Yeah. And so you give up. Little tiny increments of giving up, conceding, giving up. And once you've got to a certain point where that's kind of your standard apparatus, mode of operation, then it becomes who you are. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then you become victimized by it because you knew at some point you had the courage, then you couldn't do it. You didn't have the resilience, and now you got to be a victim, right? So it's a sad process. But what I can tell you is that it's the process itself of the giving up that causes the negativity. Because if you never gave up and you're always striving to fight forward, you're at least moving in a direction that you intend on moving versus getting pushed in a direction you don't want to be in.
I love that. That is good. So as this business, it has some success, it starts taking off. The business continues to grow, but eventually the business gets sold away. So talk a little bit about that first business and kind of how that all came to be and played out.
Well, I raised the $1 million and I bought the first business on a note, and the guy I bought it from had backed it into a public vehicle on the Alberta Stock Exchange. So I had to learn how to become a public company CEO. It's hard enough to just become a business owner, but in reflection, that was like another one of those amazing things because I had to learn the discipline and responsibility and fiduciary duties. I had to learn a lot of things you don't have to learn as a business owner. Yeah. I had to learn about quarterly reports and cash balances and things that you have to report on in real time, and it has to be accurate. So it forced me into understanding the discipline of a business. But then all of a sudden I got out in the world of raising capital and I was good at it. And so, I was able to build a business in 48 months from startup, acquiring 138 businesses to 75 million. Made a bunch of mistakes and then made a big mistake buying a business that was going to be my collections company for healthcare, and they didn't do their job. And then I had to do an emergency financing in 1999, and that gave control to my private equity group, which at the time didn't matter because I was able to turn everything around and we were crushing it, invented a bunch of new things and created a new business that I was told by the board of directors, we don't need this business. You can start it on your own. Here's a waiver. They actually gave me a waiver, and I refused to take it outside the company because these 6 guys that gave me the original money and the guys that sold to me, the people that sold to me that had equity, I didn't want to screw them over. So I left it in the business contrary to what they told me. And 3 years later, that business by itself was doing $1 million a month of profit. And I would have owned 100% of that. Instead, it created the whole value for the whole company. So they sold it. They got all their money plus 100% of their money plus a bunch of extra returns. And they replaced me as CEO and sold it in 2001 at the peak of my career because they're like, hey, this is a home run for us. Sorry, everybody else. See ya. And I vowed I would never subject myself or anybody that trusted me to be in that position again. And that's what basically pushed me into what I am and what I did today.
Wow. So something that, I think is difficult there is anytime someone gets slighted like that and, you feel like, man, I've been growing this business. Things are going well. Like, why the heck are we doing? I understand. Yeah, you have some financial gains to be had here, but sometimes it can burn us and maybe not want to trust other people. And yet and we'll get to this here in a minute, but yet you still found yourself willing to trust others. Now you wanted to be aligned with them, right? If you're going to go into business with someone, you want to be aligned with them, but talk about being willing to trust others, even after you've been burnt in the past, or maybe felt like, gosh, that didn't go how I thought it would.
Yeah, that's not exactly how it happened. So I was pissed off for 2 years, and I had some
Rightfully
good
so.
and I had some good mentors that said, "Hey, you created this condition. Until you own that and figure out what you did wrong, you can't fix it in the future." And
Mhm.
I wrote very clearly about this conversation in my book
Yeah.
and how it came to a head with Hector Lamarck. And so I had to sit down and rewrite, if I had a chance to do it again, what would I do differently and how would I do
Mhm.
it differently? And then I committed that I'm going to go build that.
Yeah.
And so I didn't trust others. I didn't even trust myself, because I realized I had made a bunch of bad choices, that I could have made different choices had I talked to the right people and
Yeah.
sought wisdom instead of thinking I had it all figured out. Whenever I meet an entrepreneur, it's like, no, I got it all, man. I figured out. I know they're already destined for failure, because that's how I thought. And
Yeah.
you don't see what you don't see until it catches up to you, and then you're like, oh shit, I didn't know that. And I know in the scaling process, there's 7 breakpoints from startup to 125 million, and there's another 4 to a billion, and there's 76 elements with 240 individual things that go wrong on the way from 0 to 125 million that causes 97% of all the businesses to break. So statistically, about the time you think you figured it out, you enter a new breakpoint and you get slammed.
Mm.
And so I just, for me, it's like really wanting to understand the science and being in control of how I think and then what I do, and then attracting the right things in my life. So the most powerful thing that I learned to control is my thinking, because
Yeah.
your actions follow your thoughts, and then your words. So what you think is what you say is what you do, and what you do is what everybody knows you for. So then I had to ask the question, what do I want to be known for? Then
Mm.
go all the way back to what I'm thinking about, and then putting all that together, and it allowed me to create a business I sold for 77 times EBITDA, 151 million, helping business owners become 3.5 to 15 times larger and more valuable than their peer groups. And then I took $1 billion company to 4.5 billion in 36 months, and then started this business in 2019. And we've created a business with over $650 million of value in just 4 years. So once you learn from your mistakes and you build on them, and you surround yourself with people, and you can lead and guide them into making sure they're thinking right and doing right, all the complexity, you're still going to have the complexity, but you're going to move through it a lot faster, because it is in the complexity that you realize that's the opportunity. Instead of being upset about it or letting it deter you or make you afraid, it's like, embrace the complexity and embrace the fun of breaking through these little granular roadblocks, acknowledging them for what they are, the very thing that you need to overcome and learn from in order to get better tomorrow and be more valuable. And then it's like, if you're not having any of those, you're probably living in mediocrity. But when you do have a lot of those, it's like, shit, this is the thing that lets me be different and get bigger. And that's what keeps my competition away from me, because they'll give up. And embracing the challenges is where the value creation is made, not taking the easy road and being mediocre. And if you look at the stats across 31 million businesses, you realize all but 2% are stuck in mediocrity.
Mm. So, yeah, everyone listening, you're going to want to rewind that and listen to that. But one thing I want to really highlight is you made the comment that I had to decide what I want to be known for, like who I wanted to be, right? And then based on that, I would make my decisions to align with setting me up to be that person. And so talk about that on, a day where you don't feel motivated, or a day where you're like, you know what, I don't know that I want to put in the 14-hour day, the whole effort. But when you're really able to take the big picture and you say, but this is who I want to be, and the person that I want to be would make the tough choice, right? They would do the thing they don't actually want to do today, because that is in alignment with who they want to be. Talk about being willing and able to do that, opposed to someone who maybe day by day doesn't know where they want to go, and they wake up and they say, I don't know, it's kind of cold out. Maybe I won't go for the run today.
Well, those are people that aren't really committed. That's the
Yeah.
thing. I mean, that was, they're like that wasn't me originally. That'll never be me. The I'm unwilling, or I don't want to do it, or I'm too lazy. Like that's not going to be me. But the way I programmed myself to bring my confidence back was, I went out 10 years and painted a very clear picture. What are they saying about me? What are they writing about me? What did they say I did? What are the attributes they say I had? What are the qualities they say I had? What are the characteristics they say about me? And I'd document all that. And then I'd see myself 10 years out. Now I come back to present moment, and I'm confronted with something that makes me want to maybe pull off or not do it, or not challenge myself, or stay in bed. And I'd say, they're not going to write that about me in 10 years
Mm,
because I'm not being that person. So it was a
yeah.
different level of accountability if I was sincere to the 10-year goal. And so you have to reprogram your current present level of thinking because it's been programmed already for all your past shit and all the people around you oppressing you and suppressing you in the news and the comments and the opinions of all the naysayers and all this stuff, schools and churches and family members and friends, all programming us. And then we go out and experience a little bit to challenge ourselves and get kicked back. And then we unconsciously are like, oh, that's the way it is. That's what everybody always says. You should just get a good job and go to college and settle in and, save a little money every day and blah, blah, blah. And it's just such a boring, uninteresting way to live. So for me, I'm like, fuck it. I'd rather lose everything trying to be something than have mediocrity and have the redundancy of doing the same boring stuff every single day. And so it was like an all in or all out for me. And I think you got to get yourself to whatever you're compromising is the thing that's going to hold you back.
I love it. I love that. Now, for people that start businesses, one of the hardest things to do is to sell a business, oftentimes because it's like a child. I mean, you pour a lot of time, energy, effort into something, building it, growing it. So talk a little bit about, that emotional side for you and just being able to, separate and say, hey, it's time to move on to the next path. This has been a phenomenal run. Like you said, I think you said 77 times, EBITDA. It's like that's an amazing growth of a business. But yet it was still time to exit and go do something else and grow a different business.
Yeah. So look, it's like a child, it's like a baby. That's all emotional garbage. The business a business has two responsibilities, two jobs to do. One, to provide the life the courageous founder deserves for starting and investing in the business and taking the risk. The second thing the business is required to do and has a mandate to do is to be a tool, a vehicle, a path for those people who help you build that value to be able to pursue their personal, professional, and financial goals by helping you achieve the stated objective of the business. For anybody who believes the job of a business is to be like a child and my little baby and it's all mine and I get to hold it, those people will always be so small that it's not a business. It's a hobby.
Yes.
So the differentiation between a business and a hobby is what's the intentionality and the purpose and what results are you driving to?
Yeah.
And it would seem ridiculous to buy a house and pay a mortgage and pay down on it for 30 years to have the house be worth nothing at the end of 30 years and not sellable. There'd be no reason to do that. Everyone would agree that's stupid. But that's how people enter building their businesses when they're not business owners, but they're started. And you got to understand 85% of the people that start a business don't start it because they want to build a high valued business system. They start it because they don't want a boss. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want restrictions on their earnings. They don't want to be held accountable by anybody. They want to feel like they're in charge and in control of their life, only to be sitting there with a mediocre, because the average business owner makes $76,000 a year, less than what they can make at his job. And they still have to show up and they still have to do all those things. So they started a business because what they didn't want, which is why what you think is what you say, what you say is what you do, and what you do is what you're known for, versus somebody who intentionally starts a business that's the intention is to create value for whoever they serve and for the people who help them and for them. And they treat it that way, and they treat it with the respect it deserves to be a high valued business system that provides the two things to the two people, you and the people that help you. And if you view it as a baby or as it's part of my family or it's a family business, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the point is, I've started 4 companies. None of them ever had my name on them because I knew at some point I'm going to sell all of them. So I'm not in love with the business. I'm in love with the purpose of the business and the intention of the business and the value the business can bring to everyone who engages it. But at some point, my responsibility is to continue to grow and do something bigger in the next iteration. And so I have to know that I'm gonna exit either my roles, responsibilities, or the ownership of the business at some point. And that's my job, not to keep doing what I'm doing. But novice business owners, they don't understand that. And they just settle for kind of, I'm my own boss and I feel good about it, but then they never make any real money.
Yep. So good. Now, you also just mentioned it's about serving the people that help run the business or help grow the business as well. And you shared a story about, I think it was a mom that had this goal and she said, I want to take my kids on this family vacation. And you said, all right, well, here's what you would need to do to generate the revenue to be able to take that vacation. And I think it's so important because how many times has somebody been a part of an organization and they're told the sales quota, right? And it's just because that's how much the company wants to make. And it's not tied to anything personal for them. And you know what? If they're not the super confident person, if they're not the super motivated person, and they say, today I just don't want to make that phone call, they might not make that phone call. But if they're like, well, if I make this phone call, it's going to lead to generating the revenue I need to take my kids on this once in a lifetime vacation. Well, you bet your ass they're going to pick up the phone and dial it, right? So talk a little bit about, connecting with your people and really digging in and finding out what's important to them to help them succeed. And inevitably that helps the company succeed.
Well, for me, it's the whole reason you should be in business.
Yeah.
Like I've already made my money. People ask me, why am I still doing this? It's because I have the skill set to teach other people how to attain their personal, professional, financial goals. And so really that's my responsibility. Now I'm also not going to do it for free.
Yeah.
So I'm going to build a business while I'm doing it so I can do what I love, but also have it monetized. Right. So the reality here is I have personally watched almost 25,000 lives change in the last 20 years through personal, professional, and financial goal planning. I've seen businesses transform and human beings transform through that process. The young lady that you're specifically talking about, she begged us to hire her. She had a GED. She hadn't even got her GED yet, but she was a single mom when she started working with us. And so we hired her to answer our phones.
Yeah.
She finished her GED. She had another kid, and fast forward, she wanted to take him to the coast. And so I showed her how to set targets and goals and what she could do part-time when she wasn't answering the phones, like on weekends and stuff, to make a little extra money and to show me that she was serious. And then I showed her how to make more money doing that. Fast forward 6-7 years later, when we sold the business, she was a vice president running a whole department, and she made $175,000, I believe, on the sale of the business. Because I paid $15 million out to every single. I paid out, took a pool of $15 million. My president made $12 million of that, and then he picked up another, or he made $10.5 million of that, and then he picked up another $5 million because I gave him half my earnout so I could go start this business. But I paid out almost 15-16 million to all my employees, and shared with them because I'd overachieved my targets. And the bottom line is, and also paid out $38 million to my customers as a thank you. And because I made them my partners instead of raising capital, I said, if you do business with me, I'll make you a partner. Cool. And so out of the 150 million, 60 of it or 55 of it went to employees and partners. And I think that's the gratifying thing, is that we all did it together and we got to accomplish together. But you should be in business. Most people are in business to do whatever their little dream is. But the reality is, when you shift to the reason you're in business is to help other people attain their dreams by helping you hit your targets and dreams, it becomes more interesting and it becomes more compelling for everybody. And I think that's the miss in small businesses, is the business owners are so consumed with themselves because it's hard to be in business. So it's easy to be self-interested, that they forget that the whole purpose is to bring life to everybody. And the more they can share that with, the easier it is for them.
I love it. I love that. Now, eventually you find yourself at a 10X growth conference, and this Grant Cardone guy speaking. You probably knew of him beforehand, but at this point is kind of where the connection happens. And we find these, points that are going to be good collaborators for your skill set and his skill set, like you said earlier. So talk a little bit about how the partnership and the relationship came to be.
Well, my wife suggested we look at Grant Cardone when we were looking at who we could collaborate with to go very quickly into what I wanted to do. Yeah. And he was one of 5 or 8 people she had me look at. And I was so turned off by one of his videos that I refused to even entertain talking about him again for quite a while. And then she forced me on a trip with my daughter to listen to the 10X rule. About 15 minutes into it, I started laughing. I go, this guy knows what he's talking about. Cause when you're there and they know, you can't bullshit somebody who actually knows.
Right.
And so I started listening to the book, and then I read Sell or Be Sold, and I got a little more into the content. And then I realized the genius of his promotion. And so she and I decided to go to the GrowthCon 2019. And I went to look for 5 very specific things. And those 5 things was, does he and Elena really work together? Because Natalie and I wanted to work together. Could I complement with my skill set and what I built? Can I complement with what he has? Because I knew it wouldn't work if we conflicted.
Yeah.
His audience, are they the type of people? I've done research for 10 years on hundreds and hundreds of verticals and tens of thousands of businesses. And are those people in that room, or is it something different that I don't understand? And then the fourth thing was, um, do we think we could actually, based on his online persona, do I really think that like Natalie and I could get along with he and Elena? Yeah. And then fifth, I had a new target of making 350 million in net worth, and could he be the guy that could help me do that if we built a business together? So I had five very specific things. I think most people show up at events and meetings and they don't have their targets. And so then they just go there and whatever happens, happens. And so we went there, in the first half of the first day, we checked every one of those boxes. And then it was just a matter of meeting him and getting him to see that we would be great partners for him and Elena. And so we had a strategy on how we would do that so that it didn't come across desperate or like, cheesy. So we played that out over 4 or 5 days, and then we met, we talked for a little bit. I had some great friends that were there that I had up my sleeve, like John Maxwell was speaking at that conference. John told Grant, pointed us out and said, if you meet that couple, anything they tell you is the truth. Now there's 35,000 people in the room, and John, if you watch at the end, John talks, and as he's walking off stage, he comes over to us, pulls us up side stage and points to us and Grant and goes like this. And then he was trying to get me to go backstage. I said, dude, there's all this security. So when they went backstage, John Maxwell texted me and said, I told Grant Cardone, if he gets a chance to meet you, anything you tell him is the truth. And so when I met Grant, ran into him, he's like, dude, I wanted to meet you. Man, you got a big endorsement from John Maxwell. So it's really good to have friends that you've taken care of, because John and I, by that time, had been friends for 10 years. Wow. And so then I slow played it. And then we had the real estate conference a couple of days afterwards, and we just talked. And then they went to Cabo, and we flew down, and I called him, and he happened to rent a house right next to our house in Cabo. So we flew down when he was there, and we spent 5 days with he and Elena, and I showed him what we do, how we do it, what we could do together. I showed him the research we did on his company to fit into what I do in my company. And he was like, dude, I've always wanted to do this. Let's go. So we launched that business April of 19. I met him in February. We talked in March. We launched in April. I did my first event in June.
Move fast. I love that. And when things align, just go with it, right?
Well, what I told him, I said, Grant, within 60 months, I'm going to build a $125 million company that's going to be making $40 million in profit. And the second 60 months, I'm going to build a $1 billion company that's going to be worth about $3.5 billion. And he goes, all right, let's see what happens. So this is our 4th full year in business. Yeah. And this year we'll do 135 million in revenue, and we'll earn 40 million in revenue. So I have a lot of credibility with Grant, because at the same time, his business has gone from 50 million to 150 million. And the real estate's gone from $1 billion to $4.5, $5 billion, because he could focus all his energy on real estate. So together we multiplied.
Yes.
And that's what you want to find in relationships. And our wives are a part of that multiplication, because we all 4 are working together. And Elena has the couples and the how to be a better support and all this. Natalie has the people and how to build a company. Grant has sales and marketing and real estate, and I have strategy and all the other elements to work. We work as one, 4 of us, moving everything forward. So it's really super great, and they've been phenomenal partners.
Well, and I think something that you said, and I just want to reiterate, is that you're capable of moving fast when you're very strategic and specific and know what you're looking for, right? You said, hey, I had 5 things I was looking for. And if I would have went to that conference and one of the 5 wasn't there, or 2 of the 5 wasn't there, it's like, well, I'm not moving forward. But since all 5 are there, it checks the boxes I've been looking for. You can feel confident in moving quickly, right? I think so many times people drag their feet, and it's because they don't have the intentionality you had of, these are the 5 things that I really am looking for. And when I find that, then I will know this is a good time to move forward.
100%. Most people just start things because they want to start things. They don't actually think about it. And so I always say, of the 10 elements of scaling, strategies 1 is the first element, but most business owners start with the second element, which is marketing, promotion, and then they go to sales, and they never put strategy behind what they're trying to accomplish. So it's very difficult for anybody else to understand how to support or help it, because they don't know what they're doing. And if you're lost, it'd be like me telling you to go pick my daughter up. She's over there a mile from here, and you're you're out driving around in your car going, I don't know why the guy didn't give me an address. Like,
right. Yes, I love it. Well, Brandon, I want to say thanks so much for sharing your story and your journey, and all the amazing things you've been able to accomplish thus far, and all the amazing things you're going to accomplish. I'm excited to watch your journey, and we'll probably have to try and do this again in 3 years, 5 years, when the business is 10x what it is today, and it just continues to grow.
let's go. Yeah, look forward to it. Appreciate you having me on your show.